Hey everybody, welcome to the channel. Michael Noland here, and tonight I'm going to be covering the 13 greatest rock bands of all time. Now, for those of you who just want to get into the meat of the subject, I'll provide a link in the description box so that you can get to the beginning of the main thought for tonight's video. You know, I just recently saw a video of a rock concert that included everybody in the concert being part of the light show. Now, at first, when I first saw this show, I thought it looked kind of cool. You know, everybody participating. I get the idea of it. But the more I saw it, I started placing myself in that crowd, and I couldn't see Michael there, and let me explain what I'm talking about. You see, it was Dan on Royce in the House that provided that video, and he even used the word pixel to describe each and every individual of the concert. In other words, with your bracelet that you get and pay for along with your tickets, you now become part of the light show, a pixel of that light show. You know, I couldn't take my eyes off that video. I've replayed it a couple of times, and I've got to tell you, the more I looked at it, the more I realized there was only one thing missing at that concert, folks, and that was the castle behind the band and Tinkerbell sprinkling fairy dust all over the crowd. I swear to God, is that where we have gone? Is everything a freaking Disney movie these days? Now, I get the idea of wanting to be involved and kind of thinking, yeah, I'm part of it and all of that. But, you know, the whole look looked like it was a three-dimensional representation of Fantasia, if you ask me. Now, I get the allure. It's almost like if somebody's shooting a movie in your local town and you get a chance to be an extra. You know, that almost happened to me once. You know, the film was Peggy Sue Got Married, and it was being filmed at my old high school, Santa Rosa High School, Santa Rosa, California, 60 miles, as I've mentioned before, north of San Francisco. I wasn't looking for a chance to be an extra. I was just flabbergasted by all of the filming equipment, the crew, everything that was going on. Now, we've discussed in past videos that the first real great light shows were provided by Bill Graham and his company in the Fillmore West and the Fillmore East facilities, and he would provide that for the band. But don't you think for a second that wasn't taken into consideration when he made his deals and what he paid out to the band. We talked about this in my last video, right, folks? It's called the cost of doing business. And so bands today, even if they don't actually own the light show, in other words, it doesn't travel with them, perhaps they lease it out for a number of shows. I don't know how that's done, but I can guarantee you that the band, in one way or another, pays for that light show. And that is taken into consideration as to what you are paying for your tickets. Smell a rat? Yeah. Now you're paying exorbitant ticket prices to be part of a light show that they should be paying for anyway. Now, it was interesting because both Royce and Dan were impressed, as I was, with that video. But you know what? Later on in the video, they were discussing it more and more, and both of them came to the conclusion that they're not sure that they would really want to go to a rock concert like that all the time. It might be nice to see one, just to experience it once. No thank you. But for those two, it would probably wear a little thin in the long run. You know what? The audience isn't just part of the light show. They're now the dancers that the band would have to pay. You know, we've seen Motley Crue and their paid escorts. You know, I swear to God, that band just drives me up a wall. The only reason we get any information on their concerts is because of the ludicrous things they do. Tommy Lee pulls out his wiener, all just to finally produce a wiener dog in front of the audience. all based on the fact that he had done some nude photo when he was wasted out of his mind. And you know, that dog may have been larger than what we were expecting coming out of his pants, but I can guarantee you one thing, Tommy Lee, it's not bigger than Vince's gut. Good Lord, what an embarrassing band. But anyway, I digress. Really, what do you guys think about this? Would this be a concert that you'd be interested in? I think the concert was of Coldplay, actually. But you know, all of that detracts from the music, if you ask me. Now, I know there is a mob mentality to this, and mob mentalities can be good and bad. Back in my day, it was a mob mentality of peace, love, free love, and whatever gets you through the night. But for the most part, there was always some yanker out in the crowd, but we took care of him. But it was the exception to the norm, folks. People behaved themselves. They'd lay back on the grass and they'd just let the music wash over them. All these visuals detract from the music for me. I don't know. I don't think it's just a matter of old dog can't learn a new trick here. As some of you may know, if you've watched some of my videos from way back, I'm a bit of a techie. I keep up on the latest technology. And yes, it is impressive, but is it what we want as an audience? All right, so let's get back to the point of tonight's video. As some of you know, I've created this, and I've mentioned this many times, a fictional Mount Rock Olympus. And I've expressed that I've picked the Beatles as Zeus, Led Zeppelin as the second brother in charge of Olympus, Poseidon, and of course, the uneasy, begrudging Hades, represented by the mighty Pink Floyd. But we're going to discuss the other 10 bands that have been on this list. Now, if you've seen any of my past videos on some of these bands, you'll know that some of these already exist. However, I have never up until this point released my list of all 13 bands. Now, there's a general approach to this list. I've tried to pick one band out of the major subgenres of rock that I'm interested in anyway. And for the most part, I am a huge fan of every single one of these bands. But there are a couple up there that I have kind of a love-hate relationship. The Rolling Stones being one, and a brand new name to the list, unless you've been to my channel page recently, the Eagles. Now, I already explained some of my reservations about the Stones in my video covering them recently, but you know, I've never mentioned the Eagles thus far on the channel. It is a huge story. They are a wonderful band, and they are the band that I choose to kind of fit into the subgenre of country rock, that LA mid-70s sound type of bands. And the Eagles are an amazing band. The numbers alone would tell you that this band is at the very tip top of the game. Some of the best pop records produced are by this band. I can't even tell you what I felt when I first heard One of These Nights. It had a different feel than the average pop record at the time. Now, you may have noticed I've used the Hotel California album cover. Not all of these album covers are my favorite album by these bands, and Hotel California is no different in that respect. It's a fine album. The best of that album is as good as anything ever created in rock, but there are a couple of cuts on it that don't quite do it for me, and one of them is even by one of my very favorite guitarists of all time, Joe Walsh. You know, the problem I've had with the Eagles has been Glenn Frey from the very start. You know, I really liked Glenn Frey in the early Eagles. He was more of a team player, but after they had their big fallout and they all quit the band and then later reformed, we see a new Glenn Frey at this point, or at least we see a new Glenn Frey as far as what he was willing to offer the Eagles and what he expected from the Eagles. With an often very silent Don Henley, the two of them pretty much taking over the band and the other members taking on a more or less paid assistant position. I never liked that. Yes, The bulk of the songwriting talent belonged to him and Dawn. There was no doubt about that, but it seemed that his ego was always in the way the last few decades that they were together. But that does not take away from the fact that this band is fantastic. And you know what? There are certain albums I see as almost perfect albums. Abbey Road, Dark Side of the Moon, even Houses of the Holy by Led Zeppelin, as a lot of you already know. But I would consider the Eagles' Desperado not a great seller, as one of those near perfect albums. It has such an atmosphere to it, and it is an album that has all original Eagles in it, and they seem to have a lot of fun putting that album together. Of course, it was Glenn Frey who pushed them into a more rock-oriented area after that, and more power to him for that. It was his later antics that I had a problem with. The Rolling Stones, as I've already covered, too many great incarnations, too many albums over decades that are just classics. You've got to include them. Now, I chose a band that I consider the best all-arounder band. This is the band that best went in and out of all kinds of subgenres, and my choice is Queen. They could write a pop hit. They did it all, folks, and they had 4 writers just like the Beatles, and they did it over decades. Wonderful. For prog rock, I've chose Yes. You know, I just got a comment from one of my viewers, Oliver, who said, hey, what about King Crimson? You know what? King Crimson could have very well have entered this spot. But for me, my personal preference, I prefer the band Yes. And I think that Yes does a very good job representing what we would call progressive rock. Now, a lot of people will say, well, then why is Pink Floyd there? They're progressive rock. Well, actually, Pink Floyd was originally a psychedelic band that went in a progressive direction and then blended beyond both of those beginnings. And that's just one of the many reasons why I put them in the Hades position. They sit uneasily amongst these rock gods, but provided some of the greatest albums in rock and roll. All right, so theatrical rock, shock rock, whatever you want to call it, I've chosen Alice Cooper. Why him and not David Bowie? David Bowie's not a band, first of all. Then why him and not Kiss? Well, Alice Cooper actually has lyrical talents that go way beyond anything that Kiss has ever touched. Now, I'm talking about the band Alice Cooper, although the man Alice Cooper as a performer is wonderful too, but he has never reached the heights he had when he was Alice Cooper, lead singer of the band Alice Cooper. Some of his lyrics are as sharp-witted as anything John Lennon wrote. Now, a lot of it's sophomoric humor, but with an adult twist to it. That's what I like. And also a dark edge to it. This is my favorite theatrical band of all time. And you know what? I would have preferred to see them without the freaking makeup. Next up, no surprise, Deep Purple. And you know what? There's so many reasons why this band is on this list. Not least of all, they had my 5th favorite guitar player of all time. And given whatever mood I'm in, he's my #1 guitar player for the day. Anytime, Ritchie Blackmore. You know, I just heard somebody ask the question, was Mozart influential to heavy metal? Well, if you see Deep Purple as a heavy metal band, I guess that would be true. Because I'm going to tell you, one of the reasons I really love Ritchie Blackmore's playing is he'll play licks and phrases that sound like it comes right out of the 17th century. And he's even admitted to being heavily influenced by Mozart. For the subgenre jazz rock, I've of course chosen Steely Dan. So many great players have come out of that band, either as temporary members or visiting members for an album, and their output was consistent throughout the years. And you know what? It's interesting because their brand of music, you would think they wouldn't have that many top 10 hits. And yet this band was able to come up with top 10 hit after top 10 hit and yet still stay jazz-oriented with just enough rock and roll to get you grooving. All right, now a lot of bands were kind of big into mythologies and kind of taking on, Uriah Heep, for example, would take on almost mythological presence. They're not on this list. I don't think that they were quite on the level of these bands or the next group of bands we're going to talk about, the demigods of rock. But they're an excellent example of why I chose Ian Anderson and Jethro Tull as one of the 13 greatest bands of all time. And that is, they leaned heavily not on actual Old English myth, we'll leave that to Robert Plant, but they weren't too far off from it at any particular time. And even if they were writing about the 20th century, you felt like they were doing it walking through English woods with lutes and a flute and an acoustic guitar of some sort. I love this band. Ian Anderson is one of the greatest songwriters in rock, and you know what? He's the man that taught us. You can play lead flute in a rock band. So the last two bands we're going to cover tonight have a lot of things in common. I've kind of alluded to this in past videos, and those two bands are, of course, The Police, and get ready folks, this'll shock you, Klaatu. Now, before I even get into why in the hell I would include Klaatu as one of my top 13 bands, let's talk about a couple of things here. First of all, both these bands have 5 albums. They had a career of only 5 albums, and you know what? That was kind of a criteria bottom for me in putting this list together. I wanted these bands to actually have a discography. You know, you have one album, and on Wiki they'll call that a discography, but to me, a true discography, you've got to have more than a few albums. So I chose about 5 albums as being my bottom. By the way, that's why you will not find some bands and some artists on my top lists. They just didn't have the output that other bands did, and so they might have been a brilliant blurb at one moment, but they were gone before you knew it. Now, back to the reason I even would include Klaatu on this list. Where's Badfinger? Where's ELO? Now, where those bands were much more successful as far as radio airplay and even having a career, even after the death of members, Klaatu did not have all of that. But Klaatu, in their recordings, embraced not only psychedelia, then stayed true to that format while experimenting and sounding somehow different, yet exactly the same on every album. You know, not even Oasis has done this. They taking that whole idea of psychedelia and staying within its confines. Now, not only did Klaatu do that, but they also, like another near miss, and that'll be on my next video on this whole series, they dared to sound almost 17th, 18th century at the same time as sounding very 20th century. I've called them the Gilbert and Sullivan of rock. I back that up 110%, and it's also for their weird ass humor as well. You know, they weren't unlike Frank Zappa at times, and yet not quite going to the point where Frank would go with some of his recordings. Billy was a mountain, Loretta was a tree growing at his side. You know, that whole aspect. They managed to add a timeless feel to all 5 of their albums. All right, so I predict that'll be the #1 band that everybody will disagree with. So I'm calling on you Klaatu fans, come on, get it out there in the comments. We need some representation here. I have a feeling I'm gonna be busy answering theories as to why Klaatu should not be here, and maybe Badfinger or ELO, or maybe the fact that there should be no Beatles sound-alike bands. Although with Badfinger, ELO, and Klaatu, I don't see them as that at all. I see them as staying in a territory that the Beatles established and continuing to explore it. All right, so I want to thank you guys for watching my video. If you enjoyed it, please give us a thumbs up. That helps with the YouTube algorithm, of course, and that identifies the channel to a larger audience. That's good for channel growth. These names you see in front of me are brand new subscribers. I'm going to continue giving out new subscriber shout outs through the end of September, and I will continue until all of you have been covered. After that point, I'm going to cease and desist on that because the job has become too big. You know, this channel is a very young channel. We're still small. We've had incredible growth, don't get me wrong. But we've only been on YouTube since October 28th of last year, folks. We haven't even been on YouTube 1 year. We're fastly approaching that period, but we're still less than a year young. I want to thank you all for your fabulous responses. Thanks for joining the tribe. You know, you have made my entire year. And as I've stated before, the whole thing right from the start was so that I could go full-time on YouTube and be able to give my full 100% of my energies to the channel. We're about ready to make that transition. And that's where the channel will be going to memberships, where I'll be providing stuff that this channel doesn't. More on that later. But I want you all to know the channel, right as it is, will continue to offer everything that it has, and that won't change one bit. But I've got some great ideas, and I also want to give members a chance to have some say as to what they're watching with the channel, and well, there's a hint for you. For those of you who have shared our videos, thank you so much. I want to tell you, it's because you're sharing of the videos that the channel has reached the size that it has. A big thank you. Okay, so that's about it for tonight. I'm Michael Nolan. This is The Bottom Line, and I'll see you in my next video.